fiction writer from Simcoe County, Ontario. He studied writing at the University of Toronto and Cardiff University. Hardcastle was a finalist for the 24th Annual Giller Prize in 2012. His short stories have been published in Word Riot and the Ballahat Review, The Fiddlehead, The New Quarterly, Prism International, The Walrus, and Best Canadian Stories of 15, amongst many others. Hardcastle's debut short story collection, Debris, was published by Billy Oasis in 2015. Debris won the 2016 Trillium Book Award and was a finalist for the Commonwealth Prize. An upcoming novel will be published by Billy Oasis in 2017. Is that in the spring?
It's going to be fall. Fall next year.
Okay, great.
It's supposed to be spring.
Change the vibe. André Alexis is a Canadian novelist, playwright, and short story writer whose debut novel, Childhood, in 1997, won the Amazon.ca Books in Canada First Novel Award and was co-winner of the Trillium Award, shared with Alice Munro, of course, from this region. He was born in Trinidad and immigrated to Canada with his sister in 1961. Alexis' recent novel, 15 Dogs, which we all know, won the 2015 Scotiabank Giller Prize and the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize. Alexis began his career as a playwright-in-residence for the Canadian Stage Company, where he released a short play, Lambton, in 1995. His first published work of fiction, Despair and Other Stories of Ottawa, in 1994, was shortlisted for the prestigious Commonwealth Prize for Canada and the Caribbean region. In 2005, Alexis published Ingrid and Wolf, a novel for younger readers, which was shortlisted for the Governor General's Award for Children's Literature in English. In 2014, Alexis published Pastoral, the first in a planned series of 5 novels on philosophical themes. 15 Dogs, the second novel in the series, came out in 2015, of course, while The Hidden Keys was published just this year. Alexis lives and works in Toronto. So please give me a hand and welcome to her. So yesterday evening, I had the privilege of having dinner with André and ended with a cab ride to the Delta. And as we moved through the streets in this cab, he spoke quite fondly of London and had some.
If you're from Petrolia, London is a big city, and I was from Petrolia. I went to school at Regina Mundi, and so for me, being sent to Regina Mundi was being sent to a big city. And even though I know London is not like a huge metropolitan place, for me it's still the big city. Kind of in a way like Sarnia was.
Right, so as an urban writer, I'll tell you that, maybe we can debate that as we go. London is, I guess, your first reference point for a big city. So now I got home to make with you, André.
Go ahead.
Maybe you're wrong because it's going to be for 15 dollars. So it opens, 15 opens in the Wheat Sheaf Tavern, and the premise is that there's 2 gods. It's Apollo and Hermes. And they begin by having some beer. I think it's 5. But they're Swedes. But toward the end, you might know where I'm going with this.
Yes.
In London, the stuff of gods is the bats, right? Yeah? And yet, ooh. Work it around. It says, Apollo's talking to the server. It says, I like the bat, said Apollo. Give me another. You like it, said Hermes? It's a waste of perfectly good water.
Okay, so this seems something that people have to think about. So at the start of the novel, the gods have 5 Sleemans each. And believe it or not, I had criticism that if the gods were to come to the Wheat Sheaf Tavern, they would not choose Sleemans. And so that was a proof that I was not careful in what I was writing. I was thinking, what the hell would they treat? Give me a break. Sleemans is nice, what the hell?
Close to the track. More seriously, as we I think start to work through your novels, you actually get the sense that there are a lot of Canadian references in your work. Sleeman's, Labatt's, Glenn Gould. In the latest novel, we hear of coffee time a lot, specific restaurants, geographical locations. I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on the references to street names, the references to Toronto, the references to Canada. What that means to your work, and why you choose to have those references there that are so specific and so, I guess, of the moment.
Well, there's always been specificity because I was born in Trinidad, and one of the ways in which you try to claim something is by naming it, knowing it, feeling it as part of yourself. When I lived in Ottawa, that came kind of naturally because when we moved to Ottawa, I was 4 years old, and so in a way, Ottawa was a form of second birth. I learned about a very different world, a very different environment, and it came naturally that because I was young enough, I just took that in a kind of automatic way. I'm a Canadian writer, and that second birth was the moment I became Canadian. When I moved from Ottawa, though, I found it incredibly difficult to write about, say, Toronto. For me, Ottawa was the place from which my imagination sprang. My stories came from there. If I imagined strange things happening, it was always in certain locations there. It's like when you dream of a city and somebody's chasing you. If you ever have those chasing dreams, and you go not like inch by inch, but landmark by landmark. So all of a sudden you find yourself downtown, then all of a sudden you find yourself in this suburb, and then back in your sort of doing a circle, which would take you hours to do in real life, but in your dream life, you go by the high points. Well, Ottawa was all the high points. I could get to those places easily, and Toronto was none. Toronto for me was just a collection of streets and houses, even though my daughter was born there. But I was able to claim Toronto in a way by accepting finally that it would never be like Ottawa for me. I would never have the personal relationship to Toronto that I had to Ottawa. And once I accepted that I would never have a similar relationship, I was able to stand back from it and think, well, if I never saw Toronto again, what would I miss? What does this collection of stones and bricks and wood mean to me personally? And thinking about that, I was able to navigate the city through neighborhoods that are vitally important for me. In fact, in 15 Dogs, the reason that I'm in the beaches and I'm in High Park is largely because those are the places where I was in love. I had a long relationship with women in High Park. I seem to have gone to the beaches with women I love all the time. I don't know why. And so I allowed myself to feel the city as a place where I was in love, but also as a place where, I was looking as a stranger and trying to take in. And so both 15 Dogs and the Hidden Keys are a kind of testament and a drawing of a new map for me, with Toronto at its center.
And the 5 novels that you're working on, which these two are, will it feature Toronto in similar ways?
2 are Toronto, 2 are Petrolia. It's not called Petrolia in the novels, it's called Barrow. But in Pastoral, it's very much about Petrolia, Ontario. And then in the one that I'm writing now, it ends up in Petrolia again. My sense of Canada is as both urban and rural. I mean, people find it. I was walking around with an I Love Country Music shirt on, and some guy thought, "But you don't really." But yeah, that's the music I grew up with. When I was in Victoria, that was it. It was Johnny Cash and Conway Twitty, and I couldn't help it. So I actually have a kind of divide in my mind between rural Canada and rural Ontario. Because in fact, when I say Canada, I really mean Ontario. Ontario is, if I couldn't go to anywhere else in Canada, I wouldn't suffer as much as if I could never see Ontario.
Well, I think this provides a good segue to Kevin's work. I myself grew up rural in Nova Scotia, so I really related to the lovely collection of stories of debris. What I was hoping to ask you was, actually building on what André was saying, that there's some sense that there's an urban Canada, and there's a literary tradition that backs that up. There's some sense that there's a rural Canada in a literary tradition. So we might include André in this urban tradition. Russell Smith was sitting on this sofa last year. He's certainly a part of that in relation to Toronto. In yours, in your work, Kevin, I started to think, initially when you read the stories, there's a lot of, many of the stories actually start off in vehicles, and there's a lot of movement, and there's a lot of connection between locations, city to rural, small towns in between. And I started to think that if there's an urban tradition and a rural tradition, I wonder if you're getting at a different tradition that's more small town, or if you're working from a tradition that you really started to think through in your own work. So maybe a couple of questions you could chew on for me is your work operating in a new mode, not urban or rural, but somewhere in between? And more than that, how would you describe your fiction, especially as it concerns setting?
First, I want to say I drink Budweiser. It's pretty vital of that, so I'm shameless plug, but I'm just trying to sponsor.
We got that here, right?
I know, I was really excited. I thought it was something else, but I thought it was just weird. But yeah, I think one of the questions I get asked about my book, which is sort of funny, is I get a lot of interview questions that were about how it doesn't follow certain tropes of small towns. And usually that's an idea of people using the city or a small town as an escape or a place of reflection or somewhere they're trying to get to, and it sort of colors their view of that region. And I wonder if that isn't just from so few people actually growing up working class or poor in these areas, or actually living in these areas and sort of participating in them, and then having the chance to sort of, you're not trying to escape, but you move on, and then you actually have time to look at it objectively and write about it as people actually live there. And so I just find it's just a matter of actually coming from those towns and participating in it honestly, and not using it as a place that it was just to reflect on something else. I got asked about that, why people, they're not just sitting there dreaming all day about these other things, and when you're in that, you participate. If somebody's trying to beat you up, or somebody's trying to, you live in that at the time, and then you move on. So I think that's just the way people are there. So, and there is definitely a bit of back and forth between the city. There are vehicles a lot. There's something, that's maybe a place where they're trying, sort of showing their, attempt to be sort of mobile and to sort of make it out of there. But it's mainly just because I just grew up where there was so little to do where I was from, and you're used to getting in a car and going hours to do something else, or just driving around or doing something like that. And it's just the behavior of people from that area, but they don't. I don't know. I think the city and the city, like Toronto's only 2 hours from where I was from, but the psychological difference was there. I just think when I got out of the country, I didn't really ever want to write about where I was from. And then when I got there, I realized there was a lot of good material there. And I think that was it. It was the ability to actually live there and live in it, and not and sort of really absorb what it was, and then move on and then see what it was worth. Does that answer that?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think often in fiction, often in novels in progress or fiction in progress, it's an out migration, and then there's this learning that ends up in the city, usually where the character takes hold. By the end of the novel, the short story collection, I think it's a story featuring Kayla and her husband.
Yeah.
They actually migrated the opposite way and ended up in the countryside for a sense of sanctuary. Could you talk about your choice to end it there, and symbolically, what does that mean to go back to the country?
Well, that one for me was, I do have a couple city stories, but they're also similar. They're the same problem. It's the same. It's generally poor people or people who are sort of in the margins, and it's hard to make a life, right? So the only other one I have is in Toronto was a Waverly Hotel, which is a famous hotel that sort of has gone downhill. And it's the same as a person that tends the hotel and is trying to survive, and they're about to knock it down, which is possible for the near future. And the one there is they're in the city, and this is something that sort of happened to me while I was in when Toronto had that big flood a few years ago. It's just people who are somehow just sort of limping by, and then this little thing happens to them and they're forced to switch it up. And he ends up in the hospital, she ends up taking care of everything. And they just end up in the country by accident. Like it's something where she can find a place to sort of rest her bones and then find a job.
Absolutely. I also found what you did in terms of rural life is you made it very complex. Oftentimes, I think rural life can be seen through, obviously, positive terms. It's where people from the city usually go to have fun to get away from it all. But you actually made it very complex, and I found that really intriguing for a lot of reasons. Last year, I had the privilege of interviewing Linda McIntyre here, and he published an novel called Punishment, and there was definitely some similarities. And he said something quite funny when he got to read it, and what he said was, growing up in rural Quebec, the two vehicles you don't want to see outside of your home is the priest's car or the cop car. So I think he's made the complexity around authority, how the world is tied to the sort of law of elsewhere. Police officers actually feature a lot in your work, in this collection, the opening story as well. Could you talk a little bit about what that might mean to interact with that law in a way, and how it sort of permeates rural life in a way that might not be understood for those who don't come from those places?
Well, yeah, that was one of the things that is sort of interesting in rural life, and where I'm from, Midland isn't the smallest place in the world, but my experience was that if you needed police or you needed somebody, they were never there when you needed them. They were always there when you were, having a beer outside. It was never when three guys are having a crowd. It's it's always, so my experience was sort of contentious with the police. It was, again, it was never a real good thing. It's sort of ingrained in me from there when I see a lot of, like, in Toronto, you see police and you see them here. As soon as I see a police, I think I've done something wrong. But yeah, there's definitely, it gives you this sense that you're sort of on your own in a lot of ways, depending on your interaction. And I flipped it in the other story, the one that goes to an extreme in Old Man Marshall, because that was a story straight out of the paper. It was I was living in Alberta for 5 years, and somebody, I'm not sure exactly which town it was in, but someone was robbing his farm and tried to steal this man's ATVs, and he shot them, and then he chased them down the road and shot them some more. And they didn't die, and they were unarmed. And he thought that was fine. He thought that was okay. And obviously, he had to explain to him, you live in Canada, and you can't do that. And
because he's operating outside the law.
Yeah. And in those places in Alberta, when I visited, we're in a town with one street, and you see a cop every few days, or they just patrol an area, and all you hear is small engines and gunfire. And I mean, that's Friday night. So I mean, that someone like that, I understood that, like, to empathize with it, because in my experience, I have had good, I know there are good police and good people in authorities, but my experience was always leave me alone. It was always like that kind of thing. So for them, that's extreme. He's thinking, I have this life that even though he's the bad guy, I have this life where this is happening and this is how we live, and then you're interfering. But the police officer in that case is very much correct to do so.
Absolutely. I was thinking a bit about the rural and urban in relation to both texts that we're going to talk about this morning. And I started to think that there's a real complexity of characters presented. In André's work, in $15, for instance, it starts with a whole cast of characters, so you know that you're going to get to know a lot of personalities. Through the short stories you get that as well. Something struck me a couple years back. It was in spring 2015, and it was after Guy Van was here, and he was speaking with Michael Enright, and he said something really provocative to me that I thought I might stage a little Canadian-lit debate here. I don't know which side you'll fall on. He says, if you grow up in a small town, you may have a wider acquaintance with human types than if you live in a big city where you can self-select. I was hoping maybe to get your reflection on that, and then maybe invite you both to read it. André, would you reflect on that?
To me, that seems like BS. doesn't have a kind of programmatic feel to me, so it doesn't feel like one place is more generous in the kinds of people that it offers than another. And that's maybe a little bit of a problem with when people tend to write rural settings. They make a farmer with the broken leg or whatever, you know, they have types that always show up. And it's like, well, why? I mean, living in a small town, you meet the same variety of people as you do in a big town. You know, you're not going to meet everybody in either place. So, yes, that seems to me like bullshit.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The one thing that's interesting, I didn't grow up in Toronto. I deliberately went from high school in Midland to Toronto. I went to the biggest place I could find, and I found it a lot easier. It wasn't difficult to adjust. It was a change, but I actually enjoyed it because I found, I found it easier to live. I found it, a little less crazy, and there was a lot more out there. But one thing I noticed with people who grew up in Toronto for their whole life, and when you actually live there, it seems rare to find someone who grew up downtown, went to school downtown, and still lives there. And what I found was they still had their same friends from when they were kids, and they've had them their whole life, and they have these little cliques that they still have. And I found that actually to be I thought that was not a great thing. Whereas I had friends from high school, I had friends from college, and I had friends afterwards because I kept moving around and doing different things. And I found that in Toronto, because it has all these things you need, and you don't necessarily need to leave to find anything. You can have the same people around you your entire life, which I didn't think was. It's a good thing in some ways, but it's not always a good thing. It's just sort of.
So you may refute the self-selection piece, but just the proximity, the sense of belonging that predates that would create those kin groups.
Yeah, like I think what André was saying. I mean, a city can be made small by your circles, and if you grow up in one neighborhood and then you go to this school and you end up moving these circles later, the city gets pretty small. So it's still on you, regardless of where you are, to sort of look for different people, and I think that can be done in either place.
And André, would you agree that the Hidden Keys almost refutes that by nature of Willow's friends, who's hanging out, the cast of characters you put together that in some ways may not belong?
Well, you have to be careful because at the bottom of at the heart of the Hidden Keys is Grail mythology, and I was consciously using tropes that I found in From Ritual to Romance by Jesse Weston, who was talking about the myth of the Grail. And so I'm using types that come from a certain legend, but I'm imbuing them with, peculiarities, so they're not two-dimensional. At least I hope they're not two-dimensional.
No.
So, in a way, yes, there's a collision of upper and lower classes in Hidden Keys that you wouldn't necessarily find in real life. But that has more to do with a kind of underlying thing to the novel than with my sense of what reality is.
That's one of the keys to it. Would you mind reading a piece from it, André?
Here?
Whatever you prefer, if you want to go for it. Okay. And this is from the Hidden Keys?
Hear me? Can you hear me or no? La 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 la. I'm André Alexis. Hello, 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 hello. Good. So I'm just going to read the first pages, basically, of the Hidden Keys. Can you hear me? Yes, good. Tancred Palmieri was sitting in the Green Dolphin thinking about how best to dispose of a black diamond he'd stolen from a house on the bridle path. He was 25 years old and he'd been a thief from the age of 11, but this was the first time he'd had difficulty deciding what to do with a stone. It was as if the diamond had a personality. Tancred was a tall and physically imposing black man, but he was also approachable. He could not sit anywhere for long without someone starting a conversation. This was, his friends liked to say, because his blue eyes were startling and his voice deep and avuncular. So when he wanted to be alone without necessarily being alone, Tancred answered in French, his maternal tongue, when spoken to by strangers. Few who came into the Dolphin knew the language, but Willow Azarian did, and she took the fact that Tancred spoke it as a portent. They would be friends, she knew it, and touching his arm, she blithely began to tell him about her family. Tancred interrupted her. In French, he said, "You know, I'm not really one for family stories." In French, Willow answered, "What have you got against them?" "I just don't like them," said Tancred. Willow nodded in sympathy and patted his leg, then carried on from where she'd left off, speaking about her family as if the story were something Tancred had to know. Willow was in her 50s, more than twice his age. As he was chivalrous by nature, he listened to her, skeptical but polite. To be fair, there were a number of things that made Willow's story implausible. To begin with, she was a junkie. Tancred himself had seen her, either high or strung out, stumbling around Parkdale like an outpatient from Queen Street Mental. Then there was what she told him. Though they were meeting for the first time, Willow expatiated on her family's wealth. The Azarians, about whom Tancred had heard, owned property all over the world. Her father had been brilliant, generous, wonderful. He had always treated her, his youngest, as if she were a princess. She had millions thanks to him, a fortune, enough to last 100 years. Of course, he didn't leave as much as he could have, she said. It all sounded to Tancred like the daydreams of an orphan. Then, too, there was her appearance. Willow was thin and pale. She was in her 50s, but his impression was of someone older. Her hair was graying, there were crow's feet at her eyes, and her lips were those of a smoker, puckering when she spoke. Her clothes were out of style, a green and white floral dress with padded shoulders, a felt hat with wilted green plumes curling around to the side, and a white sweater and clunky black shoes. It was not a get-up you'd associate with wealth. Finally, there was the place itself. Now, why would a rich woman hang around the Dolphin? Tancred came to the Dolphin in the afternoon to think things through, to stand at the bar and withdraw. At night, the Dolphin was a different story, noisy, filled with regulars or stragglers or cops. He went to be with people he knew, thieves, dealers, users, and prostitutes. Seeking company, he would stand at the bar and talk to whoever was there. One night, for instance, he spoke to a Salvadoran refugee whose family had been wiped out by death squads. On another night, not long after, he'd listened to a Salvadoran refugee who'd been a member of a death squad. Neither looked like victim or executioner. Though he did not often drink alcohol, Tancred had been going to the Dolphin since he was 18. In all that time, he could not remember meeting anyone posh. The place was too rough for it. Even Willow's dealer, Nigger Colby by name, though he was albino, preferred to drink across the street at Jimmy's. As far as Tancred knew, the most common reason for strangers to choose the Dolphin was the price of beer. It was 25 cents cheaper there than it was anywhere else. But Willow did not drink beer. She drank vodka and orange juice, and it seemed to Tancred that if she had really been wealthy, she'd have frequented better places, junkie or not. Then again, who could tell about the rich? In 03 or 04, there'd been a politician caught trawling for prostitutes on Queen Street, not 3 blocks west of the Dolphin. In those days, the most unfortunate women worked Queen between Lansdowne and Trillium. The wealthy men who came around looking for sex must have been attracted to something in Parkdale, the lawless, the sordid, the unlikeliness of being recognized. For all Tancred knew, the streetwalker's desperation was itself what turned these men on. It may have been something similar that brought Willow. He found her difficult to credit, but she was also amusing and surprisingly sympathetic. He listened to her for an hour, listened until she spoke again about her father, and then faltered, and then stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I've got to go. It was nice to meet you." "You speak English," said Willow. "Yes," said Tancred, "but I prefer French." "So do I," she said, "but Japanese is my favorite." She held up a hand, limp-wristed. Unsure what he was meant to do, he held it. He felt faintly ridiculous, but that was part of what made the encounter memorable. Their second meeting was more memorable still. One night, Tancred was at Close and Queen walking home. Behind him, toward Parkdale Collegiate, he heard a cry. Turning, he saw 3 young men pulling at a woman. His adrenaline immediately spiked. He walked towards them. The woman called for help as 2 of the men tried to keep her quiet. The third and most imposing came forward. Tancred calmly said the first thing that came to his mind, "Are you guys holding?" before running at him. catching the man by surprise, punching him accidentally in the throat, and then, somewhat purposely, in the face. The man growled and hit out, but lost his balance, ending up on his hands and knees. Tancred kicked him very hard, not in the ribs, where he was aiming, but only in the arse. The man swore and tried to get up, but as he did, Tancred kicked him accidentally, but with a physically pleasing thunk in the face, breaking his nose. The man stayed down, loudly cursing and holding his face. 30 seconds of close-quarter chaos that might have gone either way, but Tancred was fortunate. Fortunate not only because he was unhurt, though his foot had hit the man's arse at a bad angle and would later swell slightly from the sprain, but also because the other two, seeing their friend incapacitated, backed away, forgetting about the woman, Willow Azarian, as they prepared for Tancred's onslaught. It was an onslaught that never came. It seemed to Tancred that a beating would have done them good. High school students they looked like, 5 or 6 years younger than he was, thin as whippets. It would have given him pleasure to hurt them, but instead he helped Willow up and led her past the one who was groaning and complaining as he tried to stand up. They reached Dunn, a block away, when Willow stopped. She could not go on. She stood shaking, her hat almost falling off. "We should keep going," said Tancred. "Where do you live?" It was a while before she could answer. Tancred waited, looking warily west to where they'd left her assailants, and east at all the lights along Queen Street, the city stretching from the small desolation of Parkdale to the tall buildings and illuminations in the distance. "I can't go home," Willow said. What she meant was that she did not want to be alone, and Tancred understood. The problem was he knew nothing reliable about her, and nothing about what had happened. What had the 3 men been after? Were they after her still? Who could he trust to take care of her? All he knew for certain was the reality of the human being beside him. Thin, a foot or so shorter than he was, her lipstick smudged so that it looked like a reddish cloud on her cheek, streaks of grey in her bottle blonde hair. Seeing her like this, by a streetlight, it added up only to distress and need. "I don't live far," he said. "We can wait at my place while you decide what to do. Thank you."
Thank you, André. And Kevin, can we ask you to read a selection from your debut collection, Debris?
Sure. Hello. So I'll just read a short bit of the main title story. It's about you'll see what it's about, but I'm going to start at the beginning. So I'm just going to read the first little bit, and I'll give you some context. It's a old couple living sort of in the countryside in a house outside town, and they're used to sort of some of the debris that comes with the area and stuff that, they have a pool where they tend to find things, but then it escalates into some sort of sinister activity in the area. But I'm just going to read the first little part from the beginning. Come pale morning, the old woman found a gray-coat squirrel drifting dead in the swimming pool waters. It traveled slow to the south end, trawling leaves and surface algae. Pegged there, its wasted tail stropped lip molding. Emily Moore stood outside the short fence with her rough-skinned palms resting atop the arrowhead pickets. Beyond the pool and the little farmhouse were acres of untended field, wild grass and road weeds the color of desert sand. A tractor half sunk into black soil. 2 silos ringed with rusted boltwork, old lettering worn faint and unreadable. "Bob," she said loud, "we got another in the pool." Nobody answered, so she turned and made for the sliding doors to the kitchen, open yet with the drawn curtains rolling against the wind. He came out before she got there. "Yes, dear, you called?" "Oh, shush," she said. "Get that net and your shovel." The old man stood a head taller than her, broad-shouldered and bow-legged, heavy plaids and worn-out jeans. "How big a hole we gonna need? My back ain't my best friend today." "Ah," she said, and looked over to the pool. "Maybe 3 scoops, no more than 4. The poor little fella saw less winters than he should have. They interred the squirrel in the damp, dark soil, tucked him in with the flat of the shovel head, and pinned a tree branch cross there at the head of his small plot. That potter's ground had dozens more crosses set in awkward rows, very few lost to wear and weather. Emily had written on all of them in black ink such things as raccoon, spring, 1998. Markers had likewise been posted for chipmunks, groundhogs, rabbits, one wayward cat. The old man had complained early on about the burials, but it turned out if they didn't lay out the bodies, his wife couldn't sleep at night. So he'd quit his griping and kept at the planting. No prayers were said. Emily walked the grounds maybe a mile out from the house, following a length of a long and bending stream. There were blockages where water built and ran humped over sodden leaves. The old woman carried a cherry branch walking stick, and she worked the little dams loose and watched the current take them on bit by bit. An hour passed, and she could see rain clouds and their vaporous tailings. Steadily they went with the rains below like shuffling fibers. Her knees were singing to her about the humidity. She'd had to retie her long gray hair more than once on the walk, and now she just let it blow about the shoulders of her overcoat. Winds whipped the little house while they lay in their places in bed. They'd left the window slit open and it whistled at them. The drapes were near sideways for minutes at a time. Emily's bedside lamp had its bulb turned low, and she had laid her book down beside it a long time ago to study the sounds of that storm. Thunderclaps landed like atomics and could be felt by the bed springs. She had thought the weather would carry past, but it all seemed to have sat down and settled right in that farmstead. Finally, she reached up into the lamp and turned the key. The room didn't go truly dark somehow. Once in a while, fork lightning flashed white daylight through the curtain cloth, scented the air with electric. "This is a bad one, ain't it?" Bob said. "Yes, I don't remember the last like it." He had corralled her in against him, and she let him, his arms with their cord muscle and mean elbow knobs, skin soft as old paper. She closed her eyes and then opened them again. "Jesus H. Christ," she said. "What the hell is that?" "I took one of them pills," he said. "When?" "A few hours ago." Emily whacked him on the thigh through the covers. The two of them lay there quiet for a while, with the rains battering the roof shingles. "Well," she said, and turned around, took his face in her hands. The kitchen entranceway shone near sunrise. Emily had the door open, and the floor tiles were warming under her bare feet. The storm had picked up debris from all across the county and seemed to have flung all of it down on their plot. Emily waited for Bob to dress while she brewed coffee on the stove. She thought the power would be out for sure, but it wasn't, or at least wasn't anymore. They went outside in their coveralls and boots, and Bob made for the garage in his barrow and work tools. A length of eaves trough had come loose at one end of the building, and he had to shift it wide to get the door open. Emily watched him fuss with the thing for a few seconds, and then she walked out from the house. She'd not made it to the poolside fencing, and yet she knew there was something wrong in there. The waters were dark with steeped mud, and thatchwork layers of leaves and sticks lay over entire sections of the pool. Near the center, a young woman's white body carried past in a torn nightgown, lower back and ass up at the surface, while her legs and arms and hair dangled like she was reaching for something at the bottom. Emily didn't know how she got over the fence, but she was over and bone sore in her legs. She called back toward the house. Her hand searched the water for part of the girl's gown, but it couldn't reach. When she got into the pool, the cold all but stopped her heart. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Kevin. There's a number of themes connecting the works, and I think connecting the readings we just heard. I was hoping to maybe focus a little bit on responsibility as toward others. I think you see the story just read in a whole host of ways. So I'll start with you, André, and then you connect with the reading directly. But Tancred feels obviously responsible for Willow, and I'll read a couple quotes and get your sense of it. So early on in The Hidden Keys, we learn in a dialogue with the character, Colby, where he says to Tancred, "I just want you to know that you don't have to worry about Willow. I heard you bought her breakfast the other day, and I thought, that's generous. But then I thought, maybe you think she's your responsibility, and I want you to know that's not true." Later, toward the end of the novel, we come to know Tancred did, and this is a quote, everything Willow had asked of him. It's the seal of the promise, I think, that's made between them. So the question I maybe want to tackle with a little bit is, how would you describe the sense of responsibility that Tancred feels for Willow? And maybe by extension, what theories of responsibility for others were you exploring more generally? Maybe I guys can use the mic.
Yeah. I almost wish you could ask Kevin, because I wanted to find a part in the novel that kind of explains that.
Well, I can hold that. You can find it, and we can talk to Kevin about responsibility a bit.
Okay, but okay, yes.
Is that okay? So where I was thinking of maybe taking this question with you, Kevin, was responsibility to others, especially family. And I think in this text, you just read even to those who have passed, obviously. Thank you, and animals. Our president agreed. They usually take two forms. The responses are taking care. It's a deep devotional care. But an equal response is one that's responds in violence. I'm thinking of the story of the rope, which is a very ominous title, given the subject matter. It's about a son's devotion to his mother, who's an alcoholic. I'm thinking of Spread Low on the Fields. It's about a son's anger of the father's death, accidental. And also To Have to Wait, which is a story that resonated with me a lot, as we spoke last night a little bit. And that's about a son's devotion to a father, experiencing mental anguish, and sons in the plural, and a mother in longing, but maybe to a fault. There's a scene there where the boys act violently to another group at a gas station as they make their way to the hospital to pick up their father. So it's all, I think, tangled in this text in really intriguing ways. And what I wanted to ask you is what is your perspective on the ranges of responses, from bitter violence to deep devotional care, that you want to explore in your characters?
Well, again, one thing that happens in my book is it can be pretty bleak, and it's not exactly the most uplifting thing, but most people can read it and get through it, especially the violence, which I tried for a long time to get right in my writing, but most people have still been able to get through it because it has some hope in there, and also the people aren't terrible people. It's hard to write characters that are actually at their base not good people or awful characters, and you can do bad things. My characters are generally pretty good, you can root for them, but they have to do some bad things, and I think that's the thing, is it's a feeling that it has to be done and it's justified to do it. It can lead to something else that ends up ruining them, but it's something, if somebody has come after their family, they have to do it, right? And I've written about that or talked about before, with the violence in my stuff, it doesn't usually come from a place of hate or of anger. It usually comes from love, which is a strange thing to think, but it's true. It's usually a protective sort of mechanism, and sometimes it's undertaken by people who are not violent people. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're good at it, but it's mostly comes from a place of love and sort of tribalism, sort of protection for their family.
Absolutely.
And then, so yeah, I think that's why it's palatable, and I think that's why it resonates, even though it's a bit harsh. As far as the other ones, it's all the same thing. It's sort of an obligation to the family. There is something in there where they have very little else in many cases, and they feel that is their obligation, and they'll follow it through to ruin. But it's a driving factor in their lives. It's their unifying thing with these families and these people. It's the one thing they for sure have control over what they have.
To Have to Wait as well, when the two sons respond in anger to a group that challenge and make fun of the hospital where their father is, and there's that scene in this in-between space between their home and the hospital. There's also a bit of a release when the father speaks to the sons and said, not in my name, don't commit violence in my name. What did that moment mean to you that happened in the vehicle as they traveled back home, that the father released them from that sense of obligation?
Well, I think that, it's in that story, a lot of my stories deal with mental illness, and it's something I'm pretty familiar with in my family, and it's, it never was treated as sort of a shameful thing, which we were lucky. But in that sense, these kids who have had an education in it, unlike many of the people, some people that they would know, still are responding in sort of out of hurt, or they've been hurt, and they think that's the way to do it. They think someone's going to insult our family because of this. But the father's older, and he's been through it. He's well beyond that. He knows that that doesn't change what he's gone through, and it just makes it worse. He doesn't want to see them, banged up in jail because of this, but they feel they have to do this thing. So I think it's just the maturity that's him, and in this position where he's vulnerable, is still able to teach these kids something, right? So that to me is the sort of the part of that story. They're trying to be men in this place of this other man, but he's still their father, and he's still teaching them something right there.
Yeah, there's an exchange of wisdom there to do with maturity from a father to eldest son. And then there's another layer, I think, with Matthew, the youngest son.
Yeah, I think they start to sort of sink in and realize, and it's just sort of the way that story went, where it went to his perspective at the end as the youngest one, but he's sort of the one that was sort of stuck out west and doing a bunch of different things, but yeah, there's definitely a transfer of knowledge there between them.
Absolutely. So I want to revisit responsibility in your work, which is, I really think, everywhere. In the passages I was reading, I was trying to get to Tanker's responsibility to Willow, and the questions I was hoping maybe you could visit had to do with describing the sense of responsibility that Tanker does feel, and maybe what theories of responsibilities by extension.
It's very complicated for me, so I'm going to read this passage very quickly. The glimpses he had of Willow's resolve and determination were what interested him most. He was not moved by weakness, though he felt bound by vulnerability. This was a precept Tancred had taken from his closest friend, Daniel Mandelstam, one of two friends he had since childhood in Alexandra Park. As Daniel put it, weakness was a habit, one that led to a kind of contented incapacity. It made no sense to help the weak, because that was what people called enabling. But as to the vulnerable, that was a different story. Anyone might, given the circumstances, find themselves even above their heads. And it was dishonorable, Daniel thought, to let such people sink. Tancred had agreed. But the distinction was neither clear nor absolute to the young men, since, as Daniel said, the weak too could be vulnerable. A further twist, Daniel was now a policeman who was paid to protect the weak and the vulnerable indiscriminately. For me, the idea of weakness and vulnerability and how one is bound to others is something that is important to Tancred, who is a thief who knows that he is in some ways doing wrong, but he has a code of honor, so-called, that allows him to do what he does and to feel okay about himself. And part of that code is in his responsibility to other people. When he meets Willow, he meets someone who, although she is a junkie, has qualities and dignity that is unexpected and that he finds in need of protection. And so there's just this mechanism that is very complex, that he is doing something, thieving, that a young man does because they don't think about the further consequences of what they do. But in order to feel good about himself, in order to continue with that life, he has a code by which he lives, which includes how he should treat those who are less fortunate than him. So it's a mechanism that both constrains him, but allows him also to live the life that he's leading. So it's very complicated.
And where do you think that comes from for Tancred?
It comes definitely from, he didn't know his own father, but his best friend's father, Baruch Mandelstam by name, is a Winnipeg anarchist, and kind of, not beat in, but very much raised both children, Daniel and Tancred, in the idea of the injustice that is at the heart of their society. And both guys, both Tancred, who becomes a thief, and Daniel, who is a policeman, are stimulated by that sense of injustice. But to different ways. And it turns out in the novel that in some ways Baruch prefers the thieving that Tancred does to the policing that Daniel does.
Yeah, but there's a line toward the end, I think, that's recalled, where Daniel is recalling speaking with his father. He says, I think the father says
He wishes that he was a thief rather than a policeman, because in the eyes of the father, who's an anarchist and who believes in a fundamental injustice, in the eyes of the father, the police are basically the dogs of the wealthy who show no conscience when they break up strikes or when they break up things that are aimed towards justice. So the thieving that Tancred does, as far as Baruch is concerned, is the lesser of the two evils.
Absolutely. As we move toward the end, I want to ask one more question and get your sense of it, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A as well. Moving from the individual that larger sense of responsibility, the theme that you share most is this idea of home, the threat of the loss of home. You see it in the exchanges between fathers and sons, mothers in waiting. So I wanted to get your sense of that, and I'll start with a line that captures homesickness from the Hidden Keys. There's a moment when Tancred's away from Toronto. He represents himself as Canadian with a group of others. And he says, in that way, his home came flooding back to him. Whole, a gift, not lost, but waited. So there's something there in the waiting that reconciles the loss or moves it back to his memory. Could you speak, André, this is a large question, about home in the work and how the idea of waiting can somehow ward off the loss of home?
It's a big question, because in some ways I've been writing about it since I started, because having left Trinidad at an early age, the notion of what is my home, meeting my parents as strangers, the notion of what is home became very problematical. What is it? Is it the place where these people who I don't know live? Or is it where those people back there with whom I share an accent and
stories
live? So there's been a conflict in me where allegiances should lie for the longest time. But the notion of it in Hidden Keys is based on the notion of what is good and what is evil. For me, that question, what is the good, has to be answered at least at some point by where are you talking about? What is permissible or not permissible can be radically different depending on the environment that we're talking about. And so part of why Toronto is so defined is that this is the place from which good or evil can take place. This is the context of the discussion of the moral. And home is just that. It is the place which is at the origin of the question, what is good, what is not good, how must one live, what is a good life. So specifically in the Hidden Keys, it is the ground from which the moral can take life or exist in.
Yeah, there's some sense in Tancred that it's in him. There's lots of passages, I think, that starts to think about home as the people or the places. Is it grounded in the geography? Is it grounded in the family?
Well, he realizes in the end that it's both. That it is people and that it is the geography and that they're intertwined. His imagination of the place, i.e. in the person, and his imagination of the place is central to what the place is. So there is no way to extricate the person from the geography. These are only illusorily separated. Men, women, place are, they're like inextricable.
And So home and family loom large in degree across the whole story collection. I think probably what André was speaking to was resonating with you as well. Like the story we just talked about, where that sense of good comes from, family, the sense of landscape geography. So the story "I Have to Wait," which I keep coming back to, obviously plays into what André's work is doing a little bit. Home as whole, a gift, not lost but waiting. He's away from home, but in this waiting for it, it kind of renews it. I wanted to read a very quick passage. This is at the end, "I Have to Wait." This is the mother waiting for the return of the father and 2 sons from the hospital. She would be wondering if they had eaten already while she waited. Her appetite lost to nervousness. They would come in, and she would fuss about them and say something about them being late, and then she would hug their father very hard, and Paul, and Matthew even harder, as if they had been locked away from him, and locked away with him. She might not expect them to eat, but she would lay out their supper and make them sit down at the table, the 4 of them together. She would take her place last, having waited with the phantoms and the dark corners and the pictures of their long-gone relatives. The part that was missing returned to her, and their house made home again. Could you speak to the loss of home, and more importantly, maybe what you were talking about toward the end, the hope of renewal in this collection?
Yeah, it's good to tie into what I was thinking about André's talk. My family, my parents were from England. They were from Liverpool, and all my family was from Northern Ireland and Northern England, and we were the first ones in Canada. And then we moved there. We didn't really have a lot of money to travel much, but we did move there when I was a kid, and lived there when I was 7 till I was 10. So that sort of definitely changed my perspective on what was available, and sort of a sense of home, because so much of my family, their history was in a different country. Later, as time passed, my mom ended up spending, and my dad ended up spending more time here than they did in what was their home. So that was interesting. That definitely changed my perspective on what that was. When I visited over there, you expect to find, maybe you'll find a little bit that was missing, and it's not really there. Like, it's something you find pieces, but it's not what you thought. So that always sort of set that off for me as far as like what that stability is of home. And then it developed in these stories and sort of the way the characters are, and their sort of hard lives, and they're just trying to fight for a little bit of place and a little bit of comfort and something. Some of them have a little house in the hills somewhere. Some of them have, some of them live in the basement of a hotel in Toronto. Some of them live in a little apartment. But it's this idea of protecting this one little sanctuary, this one little bit of this little place. It definitely has a transient nature in my book, because it did in my life. I never really felt like we didn't really ever have a proper house that we lived in for a certain amount of years. But I did feel that you can make that home with it. We had family, which we were lucky, and so you could make that home with them. And that's what they fight so hard for, whatever it is. The other side of it, when you're talking about the waiting, it also comes from that, because in our family, we were very close, and people wouldn't assume that. When I went to university, and they were surprised by how close our family was, because we were always away from each other. And part of that was just the way it was. Like when they came from England, they were apart from their family, and they didn't have money to go visit. And you don't see them for years. You talk on the phone. You're lucky we have the phone. Yeah. In the old days, when you take a boat, and then you never talk to them by letter, and years pass. So I think that's part of it too. I mean, it's that waiting to see them again, and that's sometimes time just keeps slipping away, but it's accepted. It is accepted as part of their family and part of their lives as something they've always been through. And with To Have to Wait, he's been doing something similar to what I did, which was going to a place and getting stuck there for 5 years, and then every day thinking about that it's not your home and how to get back, and that sort of captured a little bit in that story. But I think that's where those two things come from.
Yeah, I guess in that sense, home is the stuff of fiction. It's the stuff of waiting. It's the stuff of imagination. It's in there. I'm going to ask the audience if they'd like to ask you questions. I'll come around with the mic. Maybe we have time for 2 or 3. Anyone? Maybe we did a good job. So we should clap for these writers. They took a great deal of time to come to this in London, and it was an absolute privilege to read their work in preparation for this event. So thank you to André Alexis,